Today, we welcome our guest, Dr. Phil Plisky. Phil is a physical therapist, athletic trainer, and strength conditioning coach. He's an associate professor of physical therapy at the University of Evansville, co-founder of the Professional Rebellion, and performance systems consultant in professional sports and in the military. His research in movement testing and injury prevention led him to develop the Y-Balance Test and Move2Perform software. On this episode, we discuss balance. We cover why balance is important, how we measure it, signs you may have bad balance, and how you can improve it. So get your bearings for this episode of the Movement Podcast, powered by FMS. Phil, so happy to have you on today, Dr. Phil Plisky. And to kind of give everyone a little bit more of a background, Phil, we've been working with you probably going on, maybe 20 years, probably since, we first had an introduction or so with Dr. Plisky. And for some of you all out there, Phil, you've been working on this topic today of balance, probably your whole career for the most part. And obviously, one of the founders and, the godfather of the Y-Balance Test, which we'll certainly get into quite a bit. But I want to kind of lead into kind of you giving us a little bit more insight into where that has taken you, looking at balance, specifically the Y-Balance Test, and then how that's worked into kind of some practical scenarios with your research. Because one thing that I want to let people that are listening know about is how much you've done in the military, how much you've done in professional, really specifically, not just professional sports in general, which you've been a big part of consulting with, but specifically with Major League Baseball and how much, the Y-Balance Test and balance and injury prevention has been a big part. So I know that's a lot there, but I think that's probably one thing to kind of give a little bit more insight into obviously your background, but how that has led you into some of the places you've gone into and what the benefits of what you've been able to glean out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks. I'm just excited to be here. This will be a great conversation. I'm in a crazy learning mode right now. So anytime I can talk with people smarter than me and more wisdom than me, I can definitely hit that. Yeah, I mean, it's, my career started with a frustration as an athletic trainer and physical therapist going and do pre-participation physicals, no different than the FMS, really trying to identify those. And I just noticed that, man, people with the athletes with poor balance seem to get hurt a lot more. And so I wanted to do research on that. And I actually wanted to do a 10 test battery of a whole different bunch of things, including one of which balance. And my research advisor said, well, that's great. Do you want to graduate? And I'm like, well, yeah. He's like, choose one. He's like, otherwise you're looking at this whole career. So it's kind of interesting that the functional movement screen developed as this battery of tests. And I chose one in balance and in dynamic balance that, may have not been as thoroughly represented in the functional movement screen. So yeah, that's led to lots of opportunities in the military, professional sports, going from soccer to basketball to football to baseball. It's really interesting that you can test a lot of things. I think the hard part people have is how to be minimalist in that and get the most information in the smallest amount of time.
No, it's great. And ever since my career started, the fancy gadgets like isokinetic dynamometry, which a lot of young people don't even know what that is anymore, right? But it was a signature of your muscular strength, and force plates, sort of a signature of your balance. And I think people think that if you don't have force plates or a really fancy camera system, bioelectric sensors, or a lab, it's really hard to grab a balance signature. And I think that you definitely hit the nail on the head. When you can capture a really reliable balance state of readiness, you can do a lot with that. You can put people in compartments. You can maybe look forward to risk. You can establish a current state of readiness. And so I think that I'm very glad that instead of trying to build a different or better movement screen, you simply filled in the gap of the next thing we would check. We all would say, I think if we did a movement screen on somebody and it was middle of the road and we were still looking for something to work on, I want that balance signature, because outside of the hurdle step, we don't get much. And so that's a bare minimum. And so, it's going from X-ray to MRI, if you ask me. And a lot of times that is what answers the question.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I think I still remember, Lee, you talk about going into professional sports. We took, just systematizing their performance, systematizing what they do can have such profound impact. And we took one team from one of the most injured teams in the league to the least injured team in 1 year, and they sustained that. It wasn't just a kind of a off the cuff phenomena there that is a blip on the radar. But we did that in 1 year. The next year, the first question was, what else can we measure? I'm like, why? You know what?
Because we like measuring stuff.
Are you using all the data that you're currently measuring? Are you acting on it? And if you're not, don't gather more. Just act on what you already have.
Let me explain one thing. In that stat that you just said, you had a high amount of injuries and you saw those go away very, very quickly. Guys like yourself who keep good records and work with really populations where you can go in and take a sample and then resample to check the best of your work. You and Mike Contreras have probably done that as well as anybody has in our huddle. And the one thing I want people to realize is the people you're trying to grab are only 1/3 of the population. It's not right. So 1/3 of that population is probably posting the majority of the injuries in that population. So if you can sequester the people with the biggest, most obvious problems, you can change the scope of a season or a factory or a platoon, because you're not just throwing this net hoping you're going to catch something. You already know what the weak links are. And if you can build a user-friendly tool to capture that, now you sequester the people at highest risk, and you can actually do something very, very quickly with about 50% of that group. So whether you want to think 80-20 or grabbing a third, you taught me that with the YBT. You're like, I don't care what population we're doing balance on, you don't want to be in the bottom third. And dude, that's you preaching right back to me the kind of concise, simple message that we've been trying to do,
Well, if you think about it, that's exactly that. I've made a career out of the bottom third, right? Like just identifying the bottom third. That's exactly what the functional movement screen does. I mean, you think about it. There's zeros and ones. What is that? It's the bottom third. I mean, and it's you just never. There's nothing in life where you want to be in the bottom third, really. I mean, that's not a goal in there. So that's huge, and that, I think people don't even realize that about the functional movement screen. It's not that complex to deal with. It's just get rid of these big problems, and then everything else will kind of work out.
Well, Phil, I think one thing you said in that statement was systematize. Let me get my words right. Systematize the process, because I think right now in the age of data collection, everybody's collecting all this data. Yeah. But what do you do with it, and what's most important? So that, I think, was a big thing that you were able to come in and do, is help put all these pieces on the chessboard in the right place and then make decisions on what to do. And I think that's one reason that we've had some popularity, yourself as well as FMS, in professional sports in the military, is that we've, in military, even them, you think military is the policies and processes and logistics of everything, but it's too often people in that world think performance, and they're thinking not the bottom third. They're not thinking about the bottom third. They're thinking, okay, how can we get better? How can we get better? How can I take this top third and make them better? Well, it's the bottom third that's screwing you up, not the top third. And I think that's where professional sports have been able to gravitate to our messaging more so than, say, the average, whether it's physical therapists or whoever training their patients or clients, is that the normal thinking is, I want to get better. I want to run faster. I want to lift more. I want to do more. Well, even let's think about the bottom third of your problems. What are your areas of issues?
And let's
that we
not
need
think
to
about all of them. I mean, and think about where we're at in the state of whether it's fitness or baseball or any sport. Are we having a lack of information right now? Like, there is so much information available to us, infinitely amounts more than even 20 years ago. And yet where the problem lies is, how do I implement all this information, and what's the most important parts that I need to do? And, there are thousands of exercises I can do for both rehabilitation and performance, but which ones are the most effective when? And that's the question that without the metrics, no one can really answer.
I think you both make a great point, and I go outside of my profession sometimes to look at the logic loops, feedback loops, systemization built into how we teach people to shoot really small targets very far away, or how we teach them to fly at Mach 2. And one of the things that I think you come around to when you're sort of looking at that bottom third is it a simple capture, and what actually does it mean? I think under the term that we call balance is a greater degree of independence when you're older and a higher degree of performance when you're younger. Now, people don't really know what I'm saying, but if you look at one of the major components that's factored into athletic level reaction time, if balance is pure and responsive and sensitive and accurate and precise to the situation, you have more reaction time success. We can't change your processing time, but we can change the efficiency of the movement time. And reaction time is sort of that sensation perception. That's the first half of it. The second half of it is organization, movement, action. And when we do something in a single session or over the course of a week to make somebody's balance signature more symmetrical and more robust, you have helped a lot more than just their ability to walk a balance beam. And a lot of people don't process that. Their foot strikes are better, their cuts, turns, deceleration, their postures are on spot, their alignment's better, their base of support's better. So balance to me is almost like the HRV of metabolism. If I could only take one measure of your state of readiness, I would look at your HRV. Now, what's all the other data I want to see? Well, I'd love to know if you're sleeping enough, hydrated, well-nourished, and not in pain. Those are the other things I'd like to know. Yeah. Well, so let me take a balance signature, because that's the HRV of movement, meaning it is a great tip of the iceberg of your current state of readiness in a motor sense. Now, why is your balance bad, or why is it asymmetrical? That's where we've seen these two great instruments, these two tools, the YBT and the FMS, play off of each other. I'll find your bottleneck in a pattern, and then in dissecting that pattern, we run into mobility and stability problems. But what you got today is your balance. And we've both seen the YBT improve in one treatment or training session, and we've seen the FMS worse pattern improve in that training session. So when you came out with the YBT, we didn't have all these balance exercises if you're found to be in debt, because there's no way you, Phil, can just think about your HRV and make it better. There's no way to manipulate your HRV. You do it through another pattern like sleep, hydration, pain control, mobility, stability, state of readiness.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that what people don't realize is balance is truly the connection. It's the link between fundamental movement and performance. And I was working with a high school a baseball player, great hard worker, just wants to be faster, and he's not as fast as his peers. And I just walked him through functional movement screen, Y-Balance test, and then fundamental capacity screen, where we're doing a lot of hopping and things like that, a lot of performance tests, baseline performance. And you wouldn't believe the number of parents who can sit there, and I don't really say much. I don't really explain why we're doing what we're doing while we're doing it. And the parents make the connection as they're just watching. They're like, hey, he doesn't jump as well on the left side as he does on the right. And his balance was less on the left side. Do you think that's because his ankle was limited there? And I don't even have to say a word, because they make that connection.
And you know what I think is ironic? You, Lee, myself, the rest of the people sitting around our table, we are usually forced into deeper and more complex explanations about this with peers and professionals than we are parents, pro athletes, sports coaches, and dance instructors. They just get if the body's not working in these fundamental tests. But see, the problem with the agenda is if you're taking somebody through entry-level phonics, that doesn't look like reading at all. But man, it makes reading easier next year. And that's what people don't understand. We're looking at the phonics of this thing. we're down below that. I don't care if they can rhyme or sing or do a soliloquy or anything like that. We're not there yet. We're looking at the phonics of what they're going to be assembling to make a fast ball or a fast break,
Well, and I think that's the thing. I think what really kind of was a tipping point where I had to stop justifying or explaining anything was when I would do movement, balance, and performance all in one session, do that testing all together, and let the player, Gray, you've done a great job of talking about, like, that's awareness, right? When the player can go, when they can make the connection without me telling them, that's the ultimate in learning, right? Because if I have to tell them, I'm convincing them of something. But if they can feel it, see it, and I can show them the numbers for it, and they can make a conclusion, it's done. Again, I go back to players that I test, and I've learned so much. The younger players I work with inform my professional consulting probably more than anything else, because those players are a little bit more pure. They usually have a fewer things wrong with them, and they adapt more quickly. It's really interesting that the explanation goes away if you do it right.
I got the same thing in just doing the stuff with the PE. So many of your awareness drills or breathing corrections or control corrections, the feedback is so much quicker with these little plastic brains and bodies because they're just not as beat up and toxic as we are. So our processing is only going to respond but so fast. But what you've given us with our balance testing, and I do make that distinction between the functional movement screen, the Y-Balance test. The Y-Balance test gives us more precise information. Well, when we're trying to make very, very quick progress, you may not see quick progress in the screen. If you got a good eye, you'll see that they're making progress, but they didn't flip their score yet, and I'm not going to hand it to you just because it looks a little better. That would be a bad thing. However, the YBT is very, very sensitive to those incremental progresses. And I really like that feedback loop to the point where, when we were able to abbreviate that big balance dissection into a forward reach in the motor control screen, that's a feedback loop that I encourage clinicians to do. Not just because you're working on a lower body thing. Balance is a signature of how you process your posture, which takes me back to a real important thing I wanted to lay right in here before we move forward. Vladimir Janda, in one of his early compendiums that was translated from articles he'd done in the Czech Republic, was on the OTPT website back when I was developing my career with Paul Hughes. And Janda said, I don't like looking at posture when people are in normal two-legged stance, because back then the vogue was, I got a posture grid, it's a plexiglass, it's got a little screen on it, you stand on it, and we're like, well, your left shoulder's low, and I'm like in the background going, how you know the right one's not high? This is very self-serving. Janda said, get the person from double leg stance to transition to single leg stance. Around 80% of the gait cycle is predominantly single leg stance. So if you see them dump their posture or adopt a different posture in single leg stance than they did have in double leg stance, now you've captured the posture that they function with more often. So what do we see in the hurdle step? The minute people shift their weight to carry that leg over the hurdle, one of our indicators is, why do you think we have a stick on the shoulders? To see a dip or to see your head get shorter? Because the posture you're stepping with is probably the one you use more functionally than the one where you can just hang out on your ligaments, and we have people with all these different postural variations, but what you're looking at is their lazy state posture, not their functional posture. So Janda even said, if you want an authentic capture of posture, not just balance. So now the balance test is doing a twofold thing. Balance with compensation is a trigger that alters posture, and you can't control it.
Well, Phil, one thing Gray's mentioned a couple of times and kind of speak to this is people are listening, kind of the takeaway, kind of one of the takeaways today is we have to look at balance, but Gray just described, okay, just stand on one foot. And I think that's kind of the common thing. Stand on one foot, see what you see. Well, the Y-Balance test, and you mentioned it earlier, is more dynamic. So answer two questions for me. which one is more important, or are they both important? And then two, it only tells you that they have a problem with their balance. And I think the one of the important things people to consider is that doesn't mean, and you alluded to it a little bit with when you were talking about kind of taking people through the testing and you talk about ankle mobility, is that people just automatically assume, and I don't want them to assume this, Phil, is that, okay, I got a balance problem. Let me just go do some balance work. Let me go stand on an unstable surface, a BOSU, or let me, walk on a balance beam. That may not be what fixes it. So balance, in Gray's words, is just a signature. So I know there's a couple things I want you to speak to in there, but first is it okay just to do a single leg stance? And why do you want to do a dynamic balance like the Y-Balance test?
Yes. What do you think about it? And again, I think people think in this either or kind of concept, maybe a little bit too much of like, oh, one is good, one is bad, or one is good and one is better. They're really just components of each other. Now, with single limb balance, what's interesting about it, when we're just doing a static test standing on one leg, that's actually really good and is a good way of kind of doing a little balanced screen. If you can't do that, if you can't stand on one leg for 10, 20 seconds, I know you have a balance problem, right? I think where we need to think about dynamic balance is in that person who is competent in standing on one leg, who can do that well. What dynamic balance gives, and particularly the Y-Balance test gives, is that person is at the limit of their stability. We do a lot of compensations because we walk around, like Gray said, in single limb balance a lot. We learn to compensate. So we learn to do it at least adequately so we don't fall over when we're walking. But what the Y-Balance test will do is it puts you at your limit of stability. You reach out in these three directions as far as you can. And that's where symmetry problems are magnified. At that limit of stability is really where problems are magnified, is particularly in the higher level person. But it's also where, the average fitness person, the average person who just wants to work in their life better, if you can get them thinking about, wow, how do I take myself out to the limit of stability, which is where falls happen, which is where, not injury happens, which is where overuse happens. So that's kind of the difference between, static and dynamic. They're both important, and one's foundational to the other.
No, that's good. In the SFMA and our medical top tier or our medical movement screen that we're getting ready to do a breakout on, we do have a single leg stance station. Mm-hmm. A very important thing you said there is static is important because many times when pain's on board, we're just trying to establish that very fundamental baseline of balance and asymmetry. But with that single leg stance, in a clinical situation, especially when we're coming at an injury where ankles could be swollen and proprioception could be compromised, we have an opportunity to do eyes open, eyes closed. So at that static station, if we see your eyes closed just tank, meaning it cuts your balance signature in half just by closing your eyes, that tells us you're depending a lot more on your vision than your proprioception. So at that point, I don't even need the MRI. It's a compound fracture.
Right.
We will, however, at some point get a full signature YBT because why? If we do our job, we're going to see a lot of progress in a short amount of time. And I want that feedback because if I don't, we got to keep doing something else because now, depending on what we're looking at, we know balance is a risk factor for the elderly and the athlete and anybody who plans on enjoying an active life. It's going to be a bottleneck. So we've got that static signature, eyes open, eyes closed, which is the first layer of responsibility. But once you capture a balance problem, where are we going to see it in the FMS? We're going to see it on the hurdle step. But anytime you're doing an FMS on somebody and you are pretty sure this person has stiff ankles, because I see the ankle problem in your squat, I see it in your lunge, I see it all over the place. I too also want to grab a YBT in that situation, or at least a motor control screen, because as ankle mobility gets better, they're either going to get their balance back naturally or we're going to have to backfill it, because if we get them a lot of ankle mobility and don't fill that gap, that space that stiffness used to protect them from, with good stability, Now we created another problem. So I can make arguments for if you get a signature of bad balance, don't just rely on that one observation. Let the top tier force you to somewhere in your plan of care get a YBT. And if you got a stiff ankle in an athlete, you can't just loosen that ankle up and think you made them well, because by loosening that ankle up, you create another problem. Unless you solve it simultaneously, you need to know it. So.
Right. Well, and that brings us really to Lee's question of, I kind of alluded to, well, we're saying ankle a lot. What's really interesting to me is when people look at, a static balance test or a dynamic balance test, what happens more often than not is people start to train balance. They start to stand on unstable surfaces and do circus tricks and throwing balls and things like that, or, shoving the person or this, that, or the other, or they're doing the reach itself. They're actually like reaching out with their leg and trying to do the thing that they're bad at. And what's crazy about this is when I push people on this one, and these are like really good researchers, if someone has a bad, single leg balance or Y-balance test, tell me why that is with just that test. Well, you can't, right? Because it can be your ankle mobility. It could be your ankle stability, the knee mobility, knee stability, hip mobilities, hip stability, all the way up. And it's research says it's in the core, it's in the glutes, it's in the inner ear, it's in the vision, it's in the neck. So you can't tell where the problem is by a single balance test. So you have to have these other things. You have to identify where the problem is, and you have to rule out that there aren't any other problems anywhere else before you can just quote unquote train balance, because training balance is going to be your least problem. And that's where, I think we need to really think of the development of balance as well as the treatment of balance. Is when someone's in single limb stance by just walking and running, that's where all the compensation lives. If I take them down to postures that they're not used to, when I get them in half kneeling, kneeling on one knee, kneeling on two knees, hands and knees, rolling, all of these are getting to the parts of balance, right? I'm requiring different aspects, different parts of the body to do the balance. People, I'll talk to PT students. One of the first lectures I love to give to them is, hey, show me a simple way to reduce balance load. And, they'll kind of go, okay, from single leg balance, they'll go to, double leg balance, and then they'll make them a little bit wider. And I'll just go right to hands and knees. And I'll go, look, isn't this single leg balance? It just happens to be 1/4 of normal single leg balance. And I've taken out the knee, or I've taken out the knee and ankle.
Yeah, you got to explain training wheels to somebody who's trying to teach cycling. But two things, you hit the nail on the head. People flunk a balance test. They literally practice the test criterion, thinking that will authentically reset this balance problem that you just said should probably be reduced back to a level of normal control and then reintroduced in an environment where feedback, sensory rich, edge of ability, all that kind of stuff. So early in my career, I'm sitting here thinking, all right, bad balance, I can already see it. They've using the earth in their body, they already suck. I inverted it. I said, this balance situation, if I am going to offer a perturbation, a unsettling of your system, making you recover, I can do it from the bottom up, unstable surface, or I can do it from the top down. And I don't know if back almost before I started working with you guys, I was trying to do the Otis and Itis stuff, which is basically just taking a bungee cord, putting it in your hands. You can adjust the oscillation. You can adjust the size of med ball you play catch with, and you can pick the directions that you want to work. So very, very early, before I was even thinking that there was such a thing as a YBT, I realized most of the perturbations to your balance and posture are coming from the top down, not the bottom up, unless you're on a boat or there's an earthquake under your feet. And these are situations that I don't know if you can train for or not, because they may or may not occur. But yeah, if you just use logic and think of, can I create a perturbation that you can have some awareness and control of? Can I hit it from multi-direction? And it just makes so much more sense than sticking an RX pad under somebody who already can't even work with the earth, much less the unstable version of the same,
The Y-Balance Test is an essential tool in your movement toolbox. The YBT, built and refined through extensive research, gives you an easy way to quantify a person's motor control and functional symmetry. It quarters the body and looks at how the core and each extremity function under body weight loads. This info can be used to identify movement roadblocks, including measuring pre- and post-rehabilitation performance, improvement after performance enhancement programs, dynamic balance for fitness programs, and return to sport readiness. The YBT online course can be taken at your own pace, and for a limited time, we'd like to offer our listeners a discount to do just that. Follow the link in the show notes and use promo code YBT22 at checkout for $50 off. That's YBT22 for $50 off. Sign up today and add this fantastic tool to your movement arsenal. Now back to the show. Phil, I think you touched on something that I want to go back to. A couple things you mentioned. One, you mentioned falls, which is one of the biggest issues in the workplace, as well as in the older population, is just this idea of falling. And people automatically go to balance and proprioceptive issues. And I went to a big industrial conference one time, and one of the biggest things that I saw multiple groups selling was this slick surface. And they wanted to train people on this slick surface. And it kind of goes back to what Gray was just saying. It made me think of it as, okay, if you already have a balance problem, training you on a slick surface isn't necessarily going to help. But and we talk about falls in general, one of the biggest fears is not being able to get up. And I think what you talked about, what you were kind of getting into is, okay, you want to fix a balance problem. One, you got to identify the underlying issue. You could be the core, it could be the hips, it could be a mobility problem, stability problem, any of those things. But you've got to change the posture. Let's go back to what we always talk about. And one of the biggest pieces of feedback, not research related, but of the thousands of people we've certified over the years, the people that work with older population groups, what they've told me consistently is getting their older population on the ground and rolling and working to standing helps their balance more than anything. And that's just observation.
I mean, absolutely. Think about what you're doing there. Like if I were to say, what would be the one thing that you could do to like stay healthy long term, it would be a Turkish get up, right? Because what it's doing is if we're not going to assess and find out exactly where the problem is, it's going to require the mobility and stability through every single posture. And if you could think about it, if you were able to get from the ground to standing and back down throughout your lifespan, I mean, how many problems are you going to have? How much balance trouble are you going to have? Because you will now have opened up your mobility, which helps more input come in. You've improved your stability of your hip, your core, your knees, your ankles, and which will then, when you go to walk, open up a whole new world for you. So that's why, these simple things can have the most profound effect. Yet, we're trying to train, the elderly, okay, we're going to hold on to something and put them on a BOSU ball and an RX pad and, work on one leg and the other. It was just like, how about getting up off the ground first? And once that's clear and you can stand on one leg, now maybe we can challenge one leg.
It's a scaled approach as opposed to a reactive approach. We got bad balance, we need balance exercises. No, you need to figure out why you got bad balance. And I remember, this might be a couple of years ago, you and Kiesel and myself were talking about, let's shift the conversation from stability to motor control. Mm-hmm. In our world, they mean the same thing, but motor control, I think we can build more professional responsibility into that, because a lot of people are out there thinking they're building stability, and what they're really doing is strength training for postural stabilizers, and postural stabilizers don't need to be strong. They need to be unbelievably quick and have amazing endurance, because as soon as they're gone, you lose everything else too, your axis of rotation, your postural integrity. So we don't treat stabilizers correctly. And I always said, let's get rid of the word stability because it sounds so much like strength. We're going to be 3 cents a 10 on your rhomboid before we know it. So what I was bouncing off you guys is, if we, for everybody listening, had to create a 3-word definition for motor control, it would be sensation, perception, action. And if somebody's got bad balance, they're having a problem with one of those. And if you haven't vetted mobility or symmetry, I still think we've got a sensation issue, meaning they might not be working with enough information to do it right anyway. So there's a lot of good ways to do a golf swing, but there's a lot of places we can't start it. You just can't start your golf swing here. And that's the way. So if we've got mobility problems, pain, serious asymmetry, somebody who's mentally or physically fatigued or stressed out, we're not going to get an accurate balance test. We're just going to basically make balance work around an unnecessary obstacle. So if you can't say that this person doesn't have a mobility problem, and it doesn't have to be in your ankle or knee, it can be in your T-spine mobility or in your neck. And you will do a lot of things with your body and your balance to compensate for not being able to get your eyes on the horizon. And scoliosis early in life is one of those signatures, believe it or not. It can be captured as quickly with balance as it could postural inspection, right? Because we see those unnecessary asymmetries, early in life. But I think that when we look at that single leg stance signature, nobody really wants to go under it and just say, is it any possible mobility problem that could drive this? Because if you're good with mobility, if you're good with a trigger point, a half foam roll, whatever, you can change the mobility and quickly reappraise balance and get your answer in a short amount of time and quit guessing.
When I talk to, pros in baseball, they whether it's a pitching coach or a strength coach or physical therapist, they've identified that pitchers who have poor balance, and this is the pitcher whose ankle just wobbles a little bit when they get into their setup position, and they know that they don't have as good a control and they're more likely to get injured. Now, if we look at that, is there anybody who practices single limb balance more than a baseball pitcher, right? It's their whole job is what they do. And so if practicing balance made you better at balance, they would have already had it. So we know that balance is more of a barometer, more of a gauge, than anything else, because balance decreases after a pitching outing. Balance decreases as the season progresses. There's research on both of those things. And so you can actually use balance as this metric, whether you're talking fall prevention or the elite of the elite in performance. Balance is this window into the neuromuscular system that tells you, hey, is everything firing on all cylinders? Now, we have to be careful with it in that if it's not, we don't know what isn't firing on all cylinders, but I can about guarantee you 99 out of 100 times, it's not just pure balance that we need to work on.
No, all right, I'll give you an example, and I've seen it play through in the clinic many times. Not only can you have a mobility problem and think you got a balance problem, a balance problem can also make you think you got a mobility problem. And I'm speaking to a lot of people right now that have done the top tier in the SFMA. Our standing rotation test, your feet are together, you look over the shoulder. If you also have suspicion and maybe a few other tests saying this person has really bad balance or asymmetrical balance, then if we repeat the test after I've already done my SFMA and I've already made my diagnosis, if you watch standing rotation and let somebody go ahead and turn a little bit and say, stop right there, equalize your stance 50-50, all right? Keep turning, whoops, stop right there. And if you make them maintain a 50-50 weight balance consciously, you pick up sometimes 30 and 40 degrees of T-spine mobility. So that balance being bad causes an increased muscle tone to protect you from the limits of stability you can't get into. So it looks like you got a stiff T-spine. All of a sudden, we sit that person down on the bench, say, turn your shoulders, boom, 90 degrees. They turn. So we took the balance burden away, mobility comes back.
Well, his body's got to stabilize somewhere.
Yeah.
So we have gravity always working on us. And the whole goal, balance can just be defined as your ability to maintain a good upright posture against gravity. And if we think of it that simply, we have to have stability. We have to have the ability to maintain against gravity. And if we're lacking anywhere to do that, somewhere else has to take up the slack. Whether that is the T-spine or, frequently I'll see, I just saw a player last night, bad left ankle, lacking ankle mobility. I worked on ankle mobility. It didn't get a whole lot better. And what it was he was his muscles around his ankle were trying to protect him from poor stability at his hip, right? So you clear up that hip, you get that hip, that timing at the hip to be
Now
correct.
you change the signal.
Now the ankle can do its job, right? But before, the ankle was trying to provide the stability instead of having the movement it needed. And so his rotation, actually, when he does multi-segmental rotation, that standing rotation, was limited about 50%. You look at him passively, it's all there.
Mm-hmm.
That makes no sense until you connect the dots that the hip is driving the ankle. And sometimes the ankle's driving the hip, but it's our job as professionals to figure that out.
Well, here's where I think sometimes a listener, especially somebody who may be new to the way we look at movement science, can get a little confused. Well, which do I do? You need a movement pattern appraisal and you need a balance signature. Mm-hmm. And if you're asking which one is better, I don't want you treating me because I'd like you to make time for both, and you don't have to do it the very first day. If you're training me, I'd like you to make time for both, and you don't have to get them done in the first week. But my point is, on your agenda of developing a program or a treatment plan for somebody, you need a array of fundamental movement patterns and a mobility, stability, symmetry signature of some of the most frequent patterns people are going to do: forward bending, backward bending, squatting, standing rotation, single leg stance, and whatever. So a movement screen and a YBT together are significantly better than either one is alone. And you recognize that early. It's not either or. It's, if I've got both of these, I'm going to get you. I'm going to capture the problem and capture your rate of progress with the same baselines. And so you and Kyle Kiesel work together on actually a piece of software that makes these gears mesh, not clash, right? And I think you guys have really taught Lee and I a lot about a movement screen is one thing we do. It's almost one leg of the stool. Balance is another leg of the stool, and your level of pain, especially in treatment, is the other leg. And so much of what we have done in rehab is focused on the pain leg of the stool and not these signatures of poor balance and movement that don't even provoke symptoms. Meaning there's a lot to work on this stool without ever worrying about pain. We can work under the pain, not at a lesser pattern. We can work on a pattern that could be a complicating factor very easily. So we need a movement pattern signature so we'll know where in the developmental sequence we need to create your meal. And we need a balance signature to know how much of this meal you're digesting in an authentic way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the thing. I think, as we look at, if I need to take action on a problem with someone's system, I have to do the movement screen. And that I probably may not do anything else if that's all I have time for at that day, because I can't action on the Y-Balance test alone. But at some point in time, I have to see a progress to know what's working. I mean, and if I don't see that progress, I know it immediately rather than waiting 6 weeks. So yeah, you're exactly right. Both complement each other. Just recognize what each one does and what our goals are, and always think that balance, particularly dynamic balance, is our transition to performance. It's the linkage there. And when we say performance, I'm talking about the elite level baseball player, soccer player. I'm also talking about the person who is engaging in fitness and 5Ks. And performance to me also is for the older person who wants to play with grandkids and not fall and be healthy. That linkage there exists at dynamic balance for all three groups.
Mm-hmm. Well, and your language, or your thought of saying balance is the barometer. It all should be, it's a simple way to self-check. There's no reason you can't just do a single leg balance and time yourself. Almost, especially if you're training, if you're going to go out and run a 5K, if you're a lot of stress going on, we talk about recovery, we talk about readiness. Balance is no different. Do I really want to go out and have a tough training day if I can't even stand on one foot as good as I should be able to? So it's another
So
way
yeah,
to just
do I need to correct that before I go out?
correct.
Or,
Yep.
or do I need to alter what I'm doing that day? And maybe today is going to be a different cross training day, and I'm still going to work, and I'm going to work really hard, and I'm going to work on my aerobic system, but maybe not in a single leg balance way.
Yeah, and I love the idea of what you said about, looking at sports and particularly baseball of where based off the research that balance decreases after you pitch and balance decreases throughout the season. And again, for some of these parents out there, and Phil, you're one of them whose kids play sports, that's another way to just check to see, again, are they ready to do some of the things they need to do today? And even if they're not, just do some things to maybe stretch them out a little different, do some whatever, there's a lot of different things you can do.
Well, and think about it, like I'm really passionate about youth sports, and you think about it, a kid is trying to locate a pitch, which is really, really hard to do. The younger you are, the less your coordination is there. But let's just simply look and say, hey, can they lift their leg up and stand on one leg, which is the start of the pitching motion? If they can't do that without wobbling all around and moving all around, what's going to happen when their arm is up here? Right? So we're going here, 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 here. Well, where's the pitch going to be located? Well, it's going to be all over the place. So, and then what we need to do, the one caution I want to give is let's not fix it by standing on one leg more. Let's fix it by, hey, let's get them down in that kneeling position. Like throwing drills that have people kneeling. Why do they do that? Pitching coaches have gotten on that idea that, hey, we're going to rotate and while we're in the kneeling position to take out some of the variables so we can focus on the things that need to be done. Hey, let's do more of that.
One of my correctives I've been doing for anybody throwing or swinging or even kicking, basically an asymmetrical power move, is I introduce jump rope. And as soon as they can turn a jump rope with both legs in what I would consider a good cadence, good posture, good cardio, right? They can and do it. And by the way, if you want to know how we set this up, if somebody at least has a little bit of jump rope acumen, what we say is I'm going to give you a 30-second test. So you can start and stop as many times as you want, but I want to see how many times you can turn a rope in 30 seconds. Some people that might be 30 turns. Some people may be doing 50 turns. I need to see at least 5 more sets of that same cadence. You can take, up to a 2-minute rest break if you need. What you will see is a lot of people can't ever reproduce that again. That's a very poor efficiency taper. They had to brace and splint a lot just to get that done. If they can do it, that's their training regime. You set that up. In about a week, you do the same thing with single leg. And those pitchers that don't weight shift well, those golfers that have early extension, those kickers that basically are having some inconsistency or low back pain, that jump rope sort of is that piston, right? So you can't jump rope and slouch at the same time. And if you've got a bad wheel or an asymmetry or poor balance on one side, slouching is the way you don't fall down. So what I do is if I know I don't have a lot of big movement issues, then I don't have a lot of shear force or momentum. I'm simply stressing you vertically for alignment and postural integrity under control. The same reason we do carries. The problem is carries lay the foundation for that single axis of rotation. But if you've got a motor learn at the speed of competition, then you're throwing, swinging, and kicking way faster than a carry. Jump rope gets me into that foot contact sort of motor control, quick balance, quick posture attainment, and it carries over. So it doesn't look anything like balance, but believe it or not, it fixes them way quicker than balance exercises does. Because number one, it fixes posture, and then it transfers it to a single leg symmetry.
Without a doubt. If I could give one, and this comes from you, Gray, is if I could give one, performance enhancing exercise that is almost magical in producing in performance and maintaining that balance. If we talk about balance decrements over a season, it's jump rope. I mean, I can't say it enough. If you're not jumping rope as someone who wants to be fit or someone who wants to have high performance in your sport, you're missing out on tremendous amounts of information going into your system, tremendous amounts of being able to react quickly, to be able to use your stiffness, your springiness in your system. That is probably one of the biggest things that you can do. And oh, by the way, if we want to bring this back to the elderly, could you imagine, you're maintaining your ability to double leg jump rope and get up off the ground? What more do you need?
Yeah, no, that is
A
it.
little strength.
And I'm a huge fan of Indian clubs for the very same reason of that perturbation, that balance, that posture. But if I had to make the call, there's no reason why jump rope doesn't come first. If you got problems with jump rope,
you go into my
don't
gym,
worry about the clubs.
Yeah, you go into my gym, you're going to hear just jump ropes whistling, right? Because the players who have been doing it for a long time, they're just going to be whistling. They're going to be crossing over. I never even teach them how to do that. They just want to get that because they just like the feel of it. And then you're going to go see them immediately start swinging clubs. And that is something that is going to, I train a lot of people who go on to D1 and pros, and that, my gift to them as they leave is, here's your bag, because you're going to put your Indian clubs and jump rope in them, and you are never going to stop doing those.
Right. No, I like that. And kids are naturally ballistic. There's so many sensory engagement points at these ballistic moves. I think the strength coach in us makes us go back to those fundamentals and say, well, we've got to develop a base of strength and we've got to do this. Actually, you don't. You've got to let them play and be engaged and develop that reaction time. And the type of power they're producing is very relative to the control that they have. The minute we do strength training at an inappropriate level, we actually can build a bigger engine with less brakes or throw something off balance. So I honestly think jump rope, Indian clubs, body weight stuff, maybe a little bit of stuff with sandbags, more like a deadlift than any isolated muscle training. And you will develop an athlete that is still plastic at 18. That means if they want to specialize or now grow their body in a specific direction, they're still plastic at 18. And you and I don't see much plasticity after 8 right now, because if they've been doing that one thing or myopic training or whatever, they are actually going to have to undo something to do something. When you got a good movement screen at 18, you can do anything you want.
You can get a lot of mileage with very few simple kettlebell strength training exercises in the youth. Hey, we're going to get our clubs, we're going to get our jump rope down, and then we're going to make sure that our push-up is unbelievably solid. We're going to make sure our pull-up is unbelievably solid. Once we have all that, man, now I'm putting some weight in your hand, or as we do that, I'm putting some weight in your hand. We've set that foundation. I'm going after my 6 position carry, my Turkish get-ups, my deadlift, split squat, and we're not getting complex.
And the one thing you guys are both describing is more unilateral training.
Yeah.
You don't have to be, and I think that's where it takes it back to balance. If you're doing the unilateral training and focus on the split squats, focusing in on, single leg jump rope, transitioning, making those transitions, then you don't need to necessarily do specific balance training. It's already built into your program.
My career's on balance, and I don't really do any balance. Like there is almost, I have not had someone like really do any sort of balance training. Like I can't think of the time that I've just said, okay, let's balance train right now.
Yeah, it's built in everything we do, and we've seen, Phil, you were basically my partner building everything we did in the FCS, and we started the gateway to this developing your physical capacities through these balance windows of a planking stability and a single leg stance stability. You've taken the motor control screen and the Y-Balance test to a kettlebell community and looked at people who can do pistols and still saw that, hey, we still got a problem here, because most people can do a lot of pistols on one side and not many on the other. Creating asymmetry creates another problem as well. And so looking at all those different snippets we can take of balance and that single limb training, what are your favorite go-to exercises that juice balance because at FCS, what will we do? We'd capture a lower body balance signature, and all we would do is play on a balance beam. It wasn't a workout, it wasn't a program, and it wasn't here's how you engage your glute. It was up and down the beam, look forward, don't use your eyes so much, back up, play with it. We don't care how many times you fall off. And when it was
step over obstacles, reach down towards your toes, which again, you're standing on a balance beam. What does that look like? It looks like a split squat, right? And all we're trying to do is say, hey, can you manage, one of the things I'm studying right now that I'm really passionate about are these baseball players and football players who last 20 years in a sport when most people only last 3. And understanding what they've done, because again, I go back to the quote of success leaves clues, right? And one of the clues the principles that I'm drawing is I always work. They always say I work within my body. I manage my body really well, and I never try to exceed my known body limits. And that's what we're doing on a balance beam, is trying not to exceed our limits. We're putting someone in a narrow stance, which, if you want to think about it from a simple perspective, puts all the structures on the inside of your legs and the outside of your legs, all on a stretch or fully shortened. And then we have you do a movement. Well, we put you in a box and said, how can you get out of this? And that's all it is.
Yeah, no, you made a point that just came back in my head. There was a book that came out, I don't know how long ago. I think it was called Becoming Superman, and it was about all the X Games stuff and the extreme sports. And I think what the author said somewhere in the book, the only reason Tony Hawk, the skateboarder, and Laird Hamilton, the big wave surfer, are still alive today and remotely healthy and almost physical specimens compared to a lot of the guys who've attempted the same things is they never bite off more than they can chew. And there's this whole thing about this incremental, a 4% skill challenge ratio. I know my skills. I know the challenge. I'm going to reach 4% into my ability, not 25% into what I've never done before. And I often thought if I had a chance to sit down with people like that, you can show them a video of a movement screen, a Y-Balance test, a fundamental capacity, or even an obstacle course. It doesn't really matter. Say, how do you think you do? They'd probably be pretty accurate saying, I don't deep squat well. They're just body aware. They didn't know our language, but we could just show them silhouettes. Can you make these shapes with your body? And if you did, would it hurt? I think they would give you a much more accurate prediction of that thing, even though they had no experience in the test, they didn't have to be tested. They're just that body wise. And so whether it's going through your sun salutation or your Turkish get up or your morning stretch or your kata, people who are self-aware, they don't wake up that way. They build a habitual thing into that their day that just lets them self-gauge, because some days are worse than others. And the older you get,
that self-awareness, that self-awareness is again the elite of the elite is what I see. And this is one of the things I picked up from John Tureen and all his work in the NFL was when he talks about administering the FMS at the combine. It's not about how someone actually does that he gets the most out of. He gets the most out of how they follow the instructions. Tells him more about that athlete than necessarily even the test itself, because the body awareness that you need to have to be able to do unique maneuvers and unique movements, right? And if you don't have that understanding, that self-awareness, which again goes back to what you've been saying a lot, Gray, that awareness is the first step. That awareness is what allows you to do the unfamiliar very, very effectively and quickly.
Phil, just for our listeners here, I think it would be a neat little thing since we've got the balance topic out. For those of us that may be working with a client, an athlete, or a patient remotely, like through Zoom, okay? Or for those of us who are just like, I'm in the profession and I haven't done these balance tests in a while. I want to do one myself first. What are some things somebody could do at camera distance from you or for their own feedback that would at least allow them to know if they had to probably go ask, maybe I should have my balance investigate a little bit more? What would you do if you had to be remote with somebody, you didn't have a lot of time, and you were just trying to capture that balance signature? You got any ideas for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would simply go through, can you stand on one leg with your eyes open? And I want to see 10 seconds there at least. Can you stand on one leg, eyes closed? Now that's going to get worse and you're going to have more movement, about 50% worse when you remove the vision. But, can you do that at least for 10 seconds? And do the sides look and feel the same? So that's like entry level. Hey, do I have, and you think about it, that applies to every age group and every performance level. So that's number one. Number two, after that, if that's clear, I'm just going to simply have them go over to a wall or some sort of object, and I'm going to have them, stand on one leg and reach to try to touch the bottom part where the floor meets the wall and kind of see, hey, is the distance that I can do on one side similar to the other? In that case, I'm going to do it with the heel down because I really want to squeeze that ankle in this balance equation here, and it's pretty amazing. You'll see some good asymmetries there, and that all can be done literally remotely, or can be done. I mean, I have to, over the past 18 months, 2 years, we've had to train a lot of people remotely where I'm doing a phone call with them. And I'm saying, okay, hey, check this for me, do this. That's exactly what I'm doing, and noticing that.
No, I like that. And the other one that I've done, and I like what you're saying better, getting back from a wall, doing a little bit, going from static and doing that and just making those observations. And once again, I think the person who may be observing doesn't really need to be worried about counting things. What you should be looking for is a reduction in height, a lot of unnecessary body motion just to cover it. So
how hard it is.
Yeah, so you could literally balance 20 seconds on your right leg, 20 seconds on your left leg, and it looked horrible on your left and great on your right. So this is where we would have both a qualitative and a quantitative marker. Another one that I do for athletes, because I've had groups of athletes like 30 at a time, I check that single leg stance. But if you've ever seen anybody doing those walking kicks, that single leg stance, or what if we took right arm and stuck your right leg out behind you and tried to touch your left toe in return? That sort of dynamic toe touch, single leg stance, cross body reach is just another one. And, at scale, looking at 20 different bodies doing that, you almost put them on the honor code and say, take a step, do the bend, come back up, regather, take another step.
Don't do it fast.
Yeah, don't do it fast, super slow. So there's so many creative ways to capture that balance signal. And these are almost self-awareness warm-ups. They're tests because we have to use them because of a remote relationship or something. We've got better tests, but there's certain people who are just going to do the drill. They upgrade quickly, and it's a great warm-up. And there's certain people that are going to struggle for a couple of weeks at these moves. So the people who are struggling, you probably need to go under that problem. Another balance test, Phil, you and I could do if we were remote on Zoom, you could get on the floor and go quadruped. And you could just try to do a little bird dog, right arm, left leg, and just hold that balance right there, and then hold it on the other side. So there's so many things. A narrow base, half kneeling turn gets us right there.
And I think if people can't live in narrow base, half kneeling, maintain their breathing, maintain their stability, there's no way they can do it on the athletic field or standing up, just to maintain their balance as they're older.
In most developmental athletic environments, whether we're teaching infielders to handle ground balls, basketball players, soccer players, you constantly, if you've got a good coach who knows fundamentals, screams to the kids, get low, get lower. Deceleration, direction change.
That's why I'm in love with the split stance, in split squats, right? Because if, once you have that competence in that half kneeling position, all I'm doing, the next level of that is just lifting that knee off the ground. I saw someone posted the other day, and I just loved it, was saying, hey, if you can't stay competently in that position for 60 or 90 seconds, just that deep part of the split squat, I've got some concern about your ability to get low in speed skating, ice hockey, baseball, or basketball.
My point is, if you're a coach or a parent and you see that kid would have much better reaction time, balance, and control if they just bent their knees and organized their spine and got low, athletic ready position. If you suggest it and they're not covering it within a practice or two, did you ever think that they couldn't? Because when you got the kid that can't skip,
they're not listening.
You can't talk them into it. You got to slow it down, and you got to feed them that skip back in. So why are you screaming get low in week 2? You should be in week 1, but those who aren't doing it in week 2 can't. Assume they can't. And you're a week away from getting them into that. They're that plastic, but they're not going to use a movement pattern that they haven't developed, not when they're under stress.
So I think the key kind of components are, we have to look at balance, but we have to understand that balance is just a barometer. And I like that term, Phil. And there's a lot of different things we can do that kind of underpin balance. A lot of other things we need to look at. A lot of different ways we can test it. A lot of different ways we can train it. But we have to start looking at it a little bit different. And we have to, if there's a problem, figure out what the underlying issue is. To me, that's the main thing. And I think we gave a good piece of advice there at the end on, different ways they can train it, look at it at home, a few different ways they can train it at home. But I think, using balance as a barometer and just not saying, hey, if it's off, let me go stand on one foot and get it better. Right. I think that's the big thing. So, Phil, thanks so much for joining us today on a topic that I think we all know it's important, but we don't know exactly what to do about it. So I think we kind of touched on a lot of that today.
Well, and just a great fundamental way. I've talked to a lot of patients and athletes about this, about their balance, and I said, listen, if this wasn't important, it wouldn't be the first part of a field sobriety test. If balance is so important, if you don't have it and you want to do something important like driving a car, we will take your license. Now, we'll figure out why you don't have balance when we get over to the to the station. But that to me is fundamental. And I want all of our listeners to hear something you said in the beginning of this. If you will do what you do, if you will screen, assess, and test appropriately in a movement space, believe it or not, you will have people say, I've never seen a more thorough exam. You'll have parents say, I've never seen it done this way before. You'll have coaches say, I can't believe you did that much in that short a time. I can't. So my whole point is, quit trying to explain what you're doing in the movement space. Get out there, follow the rules, do it, capture what you capture, and you're going to get way more people in your fan club than you're going to get critics. And the few critics you have will probably be your own peers who want to do it a different way. They have a different agenda, and that's okay. You judge a tree by its fruit, not by its bark. So stop barking and start generating good results. And that's what I think is so empowering. If you'll just get with these more user-friendly movement tests, you don't have to explain them to anybody but the PhDs. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this has been great. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
That will do it for this episode of the Movement Podcast.
Thanks for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a minute and subscribe and review.
If you want to learn more about our system and take the next step in your own movement journey,
visit us at movementpod.com.
Until next time, be sure to first move well,
then move often.